You might want to watch this video for an extended explanation, but in short, I am on a curiosity-driven mission just to feel sick. I mean, like, in a good way, not like, I'm sick. I mean energy levels, I mean mental clarity, ability to focus, feeling sharp, fresh, physically able, full of vim and vigour and vitality. Just feeling like I am firing on all cylinders. Anyway, in my previous video, I broke down some of the main contributing factors to this thing that I am calling the natural high, and it's time to start breaking those down one by one, starting with arguably the most important, sleep. So we've known that sleep is important pretty much forever, but I don't think many of us were too interested until it really hit mainstream popular culture via a well-spoken Englishman on the Joe Rogan Experience. His name is Matthew Walker, and he treated us to the kind of class A fact porn that just inspires people to give a shit about stuff. You see, you don't get people interested in physics by telling them about wave functions. You tell them that thing about the twins who live at the top and bottom of a mountain and they age at different rates because of the relative velocity due to the further radial point from the Earth's core and the Earth's rotation, meaning that they're traveling at different speeds. Anyway, just as abstract space-time dilation analogies get people interested in physics, stories of daylight savings killing thousands of people led us down the quagmire of what we now know as sleep hygiene. And on that note, if you're not interested yet, let me try and change that. A week of sleep deprivation in young, healthy men reduced testosterone levels by 10 to 15%. Drivers who miss 1 to 2 hours of their typical sleep duration are twice as likely to crash. Those who miss 3 to 4 hours are 4 times as likely, and they have roughly the same crash risk as somebody driving over the alcohol limit. Vaccine efficacy can be increased by getting a better sleep for the 2 nights prior to vaccination. Lack of sleep is associated with an increased risk of sports injury. Conversely, one study showed that adolescents who slept for 8 hours or more were 68% less likely to sustain an injury than those who slept less. Sleep-deprived people not only feel lonelier, they make people who interact with them feel lonelier, even if those people are not sleep-deprived. And if you only watch this channel because you want to get huge and shredded like me, then maybe you'll be interested in this study that showed how sleep duration affects the maintenance of lean tissue. Participants were put on a calorie-restricted diet for a period of 2 weeks. Half slept for 8.5 hours per night, and the other half had their sleep restricted to 5.5 hours per night. Both groups lost similar amounts of weight, but in vastly different proportions of muscle and fat. The sleep-restricted group showed a 60% increase in fat-free weight loss. Only a quarter of their weight loss came from fat loss. That's interesting, right? And I haven't even mentioned cognitive performance, memory formation, reaction times, obesity, stroke incidence, diabetes, hormonal regulation. I think in this case, it's actually fair to generalize and say that getting adequate sleep quality and quantity is pretty much good for just about everything. And for every hour of normal sleep that you miss, the risks of experiencing negative consequences increase quite dramatically. But what does sleep itself actually do? Well, I'll level with you, I don't know. To be honest, I'm just a YouTuber, not really a very clever one at that. I'm certainly not going to sit here and pretend to understand the underlying physiological mechanisms that occur during sleep. Now, that being said, I'm not too bothered about not understanding, just as I care more about whether or not my car works than I do about how it works. The same, in some sense, goes for sleep. I will, however, insert some stuff that I did Google just for completeness. The space between brain cells expands during sleep, allowing toxins that accumulate throughout the day to be cleared. One of these toxins happens to be a protein that's a precursor to Alzheimer's. Neural connections made in the day are strengthened during sleep, which helps with learning skills and forming memories. Some connections, though, are actually weakened, showing that the brain is somehow distinguishing between what it deems important and unimportant connections. Growth hormone levels increase, contributing to tissue growth and repair, along with a lot of other hormonal changes. Plus a load of other stuff that I just do not remotely understand. And actually, trying to find out what specifically happens during sleep in terms of the processes was probably the most difficult thing to research for this video. It appears to be quite an enigma, and it's quite clear that it's not particularly well understood at this point. So how much sleep do we actually need? Well, it certainly differs depending on how old you are, with younger people typically requiring more. But even accounting for age, there is still quite a lot of individual variation in people's sleep requirement. A lot of that individual variation is probably down to genetics, and some is probably in part down to just the everyday demands of the individual's life. Now you might be thinking, why is there an upper limit? Is there such thing as sleeping too much? Well, when sleep duration and all-cause mortality are analysed, a U-shaped association is shown to exist, meaning that too much sleep is actually just as closely linked to all-cause mortality as too little sleep. However, I say linked because it's suspected that in large part this is down to confounding factors rather than a direct mechanistic causal link between sleeping too much and mortality risk, i.e. conditions that might cause an individual to sleep for longer may also increase mortality risk rather than sleeping for longer directly increasing the chance of death. It's also not of particular concern because as a society we are much more prone to undersleeping than we are to oversleeping. I mean, how many fully grown healthy adults do you know that consistently get over 9 hours of sleep per night? So with this variance in mind, how do you nail down your own personal sleep requirement? Well, as with a lot of things, a simple bit of trial and error seems to be the best method. And that would mean trying to set up the optimal sleeping conditions and then just seeing how much you get when you don't have an alarm to wake up to, or a sleep deficit to catch up on, or alcohol or caffeine disrupting your sleep quality. And we'll come to those optimal conditions a little bit later in the video, but for now, I just want to pick up on that term, sleep quality, because it's not all just about the duration of your sleep, and to understand sleep quality a little bit better probably helps to briefly look at the different stages of sleep. So there are two main types. There's REM sleep and NREM sleep, standing for rapid eye movement and creatively non-rapid eye movement. NREM is then split down into 3 stages, giving 4 stages overall. There's N1, N2, N3, sometimes called deep sleep or slow wave sleep due to the reduction in brain activity, and REM sleep. It was thought that REM sleep was really the key sleep stage, but more and more research is showing the importance of slow wave or deep sleep, albeit likely for quite different reasons. A full sleep cycle lasts between 70 minutes and 2 hours, with the cycles starting shorter and getting longer as you go through the night. The duration of time spent in each stage also changes, with some getting shorter and some getting longer, and we typically go through 4 to 6 cycles per night. Okay, let's go back to sleep quality, and this is typically judged on 4 main criteria. Sleep latency, which is how long it takes to fall asleep. Sleep waking, which is how often you wake up during the night. Wakefulness, which is how long you spend awake during the night after you first fall asleep. And sleep efficiency, which is the proportion of time spent in bed that you're actually asleep for. Primarily, it's waking and wakefulness that can really have a detrimental impact on your sleep quality, and that's because waking up during the night can obviously interrupt your sleep cycles. And so if you're awoken from stages 3 or 4 of sleep and then you take some time to get back to sleep, you will cycle back through stages 1 and 2 before then getting to your slow wave or deep sleep and eventually back to your REM sleep, meaning that the total time spent in these 2 really important stages is dramatically reduced. And although you might seem to have an adequate total sleep duration, a large proportion of that is spent in the earlier, lighter stages of sleep. So we have 7 to 9 hours as our general target, and to be more precise, you can take your sleep holiday and do your trial and error experiment to try and get something more specific. Within that, it's not really clear what proportion of each sleep stage you should be getting. There are certainly figures for what people typically get, and since they're observed in healthy adult populations, then maybe it's there or thereabouts, but there's certainly nothing conclusive about precisely how much slow wave or how much REM sleep you should get, for example. And even if there were guidelines, I'm not sure we could really do that much with that information. In labs, sleep cycles are monitored using something called polysomnography, and that looks at things like brain waves, heart rate, breathing, and minute movements in the eyes and limbs. When popular sleep trackers are measured for accuracy against this method, they're left somewhat wanting. Whilst they are quite good now at identifying the difference between sleep and wakefulness, they're not very accurate at identifying the different sleep stages. And whilst this does seem to be improving quite fast, it's not particularly useful at this point. As a further note of caution, the feedback that these sleep trackers give you can actually have a placebo effect. One study took a group of people who'd slept similarly in terms of quality and quantity, but gave them opposing feedback. The group that were told they'd slept poorly actually exhibited signs of tiredness and decreases in cognitive function compared to those who were told they slept well. So with all this in mind, I think the best we can do in terms of pinpointing some kind of target for our sleep is to focus on 3 main criteria. Firstly, to get a total sleep duration of 7 to 9 hours. Secondly, to wake up as infrequently as possible. And thirdly, when we do wake up, to be able to get back to sleep quickly. Actually, waking up between complete sleep cycles isn't uncommon, and it's certainly not a problem provided you're able to drift back off quickly. So I don't want to unnecessarily worry people if you're waking up briefly once or twice during the night. Finally, we arrive at what is really the important part of this video: how to improve your sleep. So I'm going to start with the simplest and we'll work from there. So I think the number one intervention that would make the most difference to the most people is simply going to sleep earlier. A lot of people have school runs and jobs that mean they don't have much choice in when they get up, but most could go to bed earlier if they really wanted to. It's just that people don't. And in fact, busy people tend to rebel against their schedule by sitting in bed on their phones for a long time before going to sleep to try and regain some kind of control over their hectic routine, thus delaying sleep even further. This is so common that it has a name: revenge bedtime procrastination. This term originated in China to describe people who work long shifts and then spend a lot of time on their phones trying to regain a sense of control. So if you're one of those people, just don't be. Now you probably think I'm going to say that you should dim the lights a couple of hours before bed, and I am. I mean, you should. But interestingly, exposure to bright lights during the day can also help you to sleep better at night. And that's because light impacts your circadian rhythm, which is basically the thing that tells you when to sleep and when to be awake. Periods of darkness during the day or light during the night can upset this rhythm. Personally, I work in my home office with a blackout blind in relative darkness for much of the day, because I figure that the darker it is in the room, the lower the brightness I can have my screens on. So one thing I'm going to do is change this and open the blind and make sure I'm letting more light in whilst I'm working. Whilst we're on the subject of light, the blue light that's emitted from screens, such as your phone or iPad, can also upset your circadian rhythm by affecting your melatonin secretion. And so that's another thing that you might want to reduce in the couple of hours prior to your bedtime. Following from the word rhythm, one of the best things you can possibly do is stick to a regular bedtime and getting up time. For a lot of people, this can be disrupted on weekends when we choose to go to bed later and rise later, but that can have a knock-on effect and then make it harder to get to sleep when you need to on the Sunday night. Yeah, I don't have this issue on account of not having a real job or a social life. Clear your system. So I'm going to put all these into one: alcohol, caffeine, marijuana, and pretty much anything that is psychoactive or stimulant or depressant. Although through different mechanisms, these substances are detrimental to either sleep quality or sleep quantity, either by stopping you from sleeping altogether or by reducing your ability to enter and stay in the later stages of sleep. Often people think that something helps them sleep because it helps them fall asleep, but in the case of alcohol and weed, you're not getting the quality of sleep that you need. I'm effectively teetotal when it comes to alcohol, and I don't smoke weed, so that's those out the window. Caffeine is something that I do use. However, I have a limit of 2 Nespresso pods, which averages out to I think 130 milligrams of caffeine per day. And a lot of people talk about caffeine cutoffs of 12 or 1 p.m. or 3 p.m. due to the relatively long caffeine half-life of about 5 hours. Now, I steer way clear of this, and I have all of my caffeine ingested before 9 a.m. Now, I have previously been through stages in my life of abusing caffeine, and I do notice a huge difference in my sleep now and then. So for anyone that has trouble sleeping and does consume a lot of caffeine, this would probably be the first thing that I would do. Exercise. If you exercise, you sleep better. It's proven. Let's not dwell on that one, since everyone should be exercising anyway. Don't exercise too close to bedtime though. So in terms of sleep supplements, this could be a whole video on its own, but I'll just brush over the basics and tell you about the things that I'm going to do. When I mentioned earlier about controlling your light exposure, that's because darkness prompts the production of melatonin whilst light stops it. So by doing that, you are indirectly affecting your melatonin levels. Studies have shown that supplementing with melatonin can help people with sleep disorders such as insomnia, and it can certainly help people sleep who work shift patterns or people traveling between time zones. For healthy people, there isn't really conclusive evidence that that it can be much help, but it has been shown to be safe, so maybe you want to try it anyway. Similarly, magnesium has been shown to help people with sleep disorders both fall asleep easier and also spend more time in deep sleep. Again, for a healthy population, there isn't really a clear, obvious benefit. An interesting one is lavender via aromatherapy. Whilst there aren't many studies, the ones that there are have shown an improvement in sleep quality, with participants waking up less frequently and being able to get back to sleep quicker when they do. This is something that I actually have used in the past, but not regularly, but it's something that I will start again now. There are also a few supplements that are thought to aid sleep by helping reduce stress and anxiety, which can be big sleep inhibitors. Personally, I'm taking magnesium, but also just trying to make sure that I get plenty through my diet. I'll also be incorporating some lavender into my nighttime routine. I personally won't be going for melatonin. All right, there are quite a few other things I'll just put up on the screen instead of going through everything. Okay, finally, let's touch on napping. So the reason that I'm making this video is because I'm actually in the process of implementing these changes that I'm talking about. And with that in mind, I have never and still don't really consider napping to be a viable option for me. It certainly can be beneficial, particularly for people who are sleep deprived, and the best time to do it is usually between 1 and 3 p.m. when we have a natural lull in alertness and energy levels. However, if you find yourself constantly needing to nap, it's probably a sign that your nightly sleep isn't where it needs to be. Furthermore, if you take a nap beyond the 15 to 20 minute mark, you can find that you're waking up from a deep sleep phase, and it's much harder to regain that sense of functional wakefulness that you need to actually operate throughout your day. For me, and I imagine for most people, it's just not practical, and that's important to me because I don't just want to make YouTube videos that are full of nice ideas or helpful on paper. Things that people can realistically implement into their everyday lives, I think and hope are going to offer much more value, and I hope I've done that with this video. So for now, I'm implementing some of the aforementioned changes. I've started keeping a sleep diary, just trying to record roughly when I'm falling asleep, how many times I'm waking up in the night, how long it's taking me to get back to sleep, and when I'm waking up in the morning. And I will update you in future videos. But for now, I hope that has been interesting and helpful. The natty high, motherfuckers, let's do it.
Jordy Lenny is my hero.